Welcome and thank you for joining Cohesity Connect. From your infrastructure to your InfoSec teams and your technology partners, all have been discussing the impact of ransomware on today's businesses. But we know ransomware is impacting everyday life when it becomes a part of discussion during the late night comedy routine like John Oliver. Hi, I'm Raj Dutt from Cohesity's product marketing team, and I'm joined by Sandler Rubin from our product management team. In this session, Sandler and I are going to cover the evolution of ransomware attack. How did we get to this point? And how can a next-gen data management solution like Cohesity can help you not just defend, but thrive in today's complex cybersecurity environment? But before we dive in, let me just go through our forward-looking statement. Over the course of this presentation, we will be making forward-looking statements about new offerings and product capabilities that are currently on Cohesity's roadmap. While these statements about our roadmap are accurate and reasonable based on our current expectations, please be aware the future events could change Cohesity's plans at any time. So with that, let's go. The ugly reality is that on a weekly basis, we are witnessing more and more organizations getting attacked and falling victims to cyber criminals. And these ransomware attacks are not just increasing in frequency and velocity, but the cyber criminals are getting more and more aggressive. As we discussed earlier today in the keynote session, cyber criminals are not just targeting your production data and your backup data, but they're stealing your data and threatening you that they will expose that in the World Wide Web or in the dark web, the challenge known as data exfiltration. So, if you look at some numbers to give more perspective, 81% of all ransomware attacks that happened in Q2 of this year had the threat of cyber criminals actually exposing the data in the dark web. They claim to actually have stolen the data. And what's even more concerning is that two-thirds of the organizations that were impacted actually ended up paying the ransom to stop cyber criminals for exposing their data. And while the challenge of data breach is not new, including the accidental data breach from device loss, but what we are experiencing now is the data breaches that include ransomware actually have doubled in last few months. And why are we spending so much time talking about data breaches? Because we already have within our organizations, departments that actually focus on that, from your infosec teams to your compliance and privacy. The reason is the data breaches are becoming extremely expensive. It is not just the cost of your initial remediation, but it is also the damage it caused to your brand, to your reputation. Also, the loss of trust between your customers, your partners, and your employees. All of that adds up. And by the study done by IBM Security, an average cost of data breach is now exceeding $4.25 million. And while these macro data trends are very concerning, we know for a fact that ransomware is forcing you how you actually do your business. We at Cohesity recently did a survey of our customers, and 95% of you, almost every one of you, said you are looking for tools that will help you detect these threats early on. And 8 in 10 of you said ransomware is changing how your infrastructure and your infosec teams actually collaborate. On a bright side, a large majority of you, 82%, have said that either you have already changed or are in the process of changing your data management strategy so that you can effectively respond to ransomware attacks and other cyber threats. What's also very interesting is just like the ransomware has evolved over time, so has the role of data management within your organization. Three quarters of you, or close to three quarters of you, 72% actually have said that the role of data management is now it's part of your organization's overall defense in depth security strategy, something we won't have imagined just a few years back. So let's look at how did we get here. 4 years back is when ransomware started hitting on everyone's radar. Remember, there was something else happening around the same time. It was the wide adoption of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. In many ways, Bitcoin actually aided cybercriminals. It allowed them to anonymously demand and receive ransomware payment. Hence, the emergence of ransomware 1.0, the WannaCry era, that impacted your production data. And while most organizations had deployed some level of backup tools and detection tools, won't get into the specifics or the mechanics of how the ransomware attack happened. With these tools, organizations were able to detect, and then with a recovery tool or a backup tool, were able to recover their data, all with the objective to meet their RPO and RTO business SLAs. And while no one should take the attack on one's production data lightly, the reality is with any backup tool in place, most organizations were able to recover. Hence, ransomware 1.0 was never an existential threat. With the business objective to recover, businesses invested in backup tools. It protected a range or host of data sources, and these solutions offered some level of data resiliency. It offered an encryption framework to protect data either in flight or at rest, some level of fault tolerance. It also offered access control. If you look back, the legacy solutions, some of them offered multi factor authentication to mitigate against weak passwords, while others offered role based access control to make sure that authorized users actually are able to access the right data to get their job done. And if they needed to look in the rearview mirror, they could always have the audit trail to look at that. Also, like we discussed, the ability to detect any kind of anomalies within the back or using the backup data. What this did was this gave you the confidence that you could recover from a ransomware attack. Hence, you don't need to pay the ransom. But in order to ensure monetary payout, cyber criminals actually evolved. They changed their tactics. They no longer were just targeting your production data. They were now targeting your backup data as well. And in fact, you might remember a variant of ransomware 2.0, DarkSide, that very specifically targeted the backup data like Veeam and Commvault. In fact, when the security researchers investigated ransomware variant 2.0, they actually found out that things like DarkSide or variants like DarkSide very specifically attack things like Microsoft VSS. In fact, one of our own customer, Skylex Medical, a regional medical center based out of Pacific Northwest, also got impacted by ransomware 2.0 variant Raiku, and it took out their legacy backup solution. Luckily, Skylakes actually had invested in Cohesity, hence they were able to recover. In fact, we have a session with Skylakes Medical and Stage 2 Data right after this, where they will share their experience of how they were able to not just withstand, but recover and thrive after the ransomware attack. So, with ransomware 2.0, while organizations had some level of protection with the backup, but the backups, when they became a target, it was a different game altogether. So organizations actually needed more capabilities. They needed more advanced capabilities. And solutions like Cohesity introduced the concept of immutable backups to make sure that the backup themselves are not targeted. And organizations that are more, well, for example, following the NIST framework and were more particular about their data security and deployed defense in depth could actually have data isolated either in a vault or temper resistant archive, all based on policy. And we know that cyber criminals are known to expose or use the compromised credentials in addition to the uh, multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, based on zero trust principles, Cohesity also added capabilities like Quorum, making sure that you need more than one individual, you need at least two people to make any critical changes to the system. Because remember, you don't need to just protect the backup data. You also needed to protect the backup environment and platform and have continuous monitoring around it. So while a solution like Cohesity allows you to defend your backup data against sophisticated ransomware attacks. Like I said, the ransomware attacks and cyber criminals have been evolving. They have been changing their tactics. So I want to invite at this point Sandler to take us forward as the ransomware evolve and how solutions like Cohesity have been helping to address those. Sandler, over to you.
Thanks, Raj. So, as Raj highlighted, the data protection platforms were hardened with capabilities like encryption and immutability and data vaults. But the threat actors changed their tactics once again with the introduction of so called double extortion schemes. So, to encrypt and exfiltrate the victim's data. The first to try to pressure the victims to pay to recover their encrypted data, but if that doesn't work, extort them to prevent the disclosure of the data to the dark web. And this was all part of the whole set of pressure tactics that the criminals used to get their victims to pay the ransom somehow. Now, here's an unfortunate ransomware story that got out of hand for a leading airline in Southeast Asia, Bangkok Airways. Now, while they did everything by the book and managed to recover their data, they ultimately failed to avoid data breach. So, if you go back to the end of August, Bangkok Airways was struck by the LockBit ransomware. Now, this is the same variant that some of you may recognize that affected a major US based professional services and consulting firm where the ransomware gang demanded a $50 million ransom. In any event, Bangkok Airways, they actually detected the attack on the 23rd of August, and they immediately reported it to the Royal Thai Police. Now, while they were able to avoid disruption to core aviation systems and they managed to restore and recover affected services relatively quickly, the attackers disclosed very shortly afterwards that they had exfiltrated upwards of 200 gigabytes of data from the airline. Now, the airline, they responded very pragmatically. They publicly announced the data breach on the 26th of August. And again, this was perhaps to avoid the need to pay the ransom. But 2 days after that, passenger records, including substantial volumes of PII, so things like names, addresses, frequent flyer numbers, partial credit card numbers, even passenger meal preferences, these were leaked out onto the dark web. And so just imagine for a moment that you were one of these passengers. You know, you had just come back from a nice tropical vacation. How would you feel if you suddenly read in the news that your personal data may have been breached? In any event, this left the airline dealing with the fallout from very unflattering media coverage over the breach. And it unfortunately glossed over a lot of the right actions that the airline took in response. So, things that they did to prevent the incident from spreading or potentially jeopardizing passenger or crew safety. But even now, Bangkok Airways, they aren't out of the woods. So, besides any redress that they owe their customers due to any local data protection laws, a much more concerning area of exposure would be breach of PII belonging to any EU citizens. And so, if this PII were breached, then there may be a large number of GDPR violations that the airline would have to contend with, given the long arm of EU regulators. And in fact, some of the largest fines to date due to GDPR violations have been against airlines that have suffered from similar sorts of malicious passenger data breaches. And in some cases, the fines levied totaled tens of millions of euros. So, how does ransomware 3.0 really work? And again, I don't want to get too much into the mechanics of any specific variant, but the important point is that this type of ransomware has really been a game changer on a number of fronts. And to explain, we have to understand how these attacks operate. So, to begin with, this ransomware 3.0 starts out very similar to its predecessors in the earlier stages. So, it attacks the production data with encryption, as well as specifically targets the organization's security and data protection infrastructure. Now, here's the big difference. Ransomware 3.0 also covertly amasses and begins to exfiltrate victims' data. And as we saw in the case of Bangkok Airways, this was hundreds of gigabytes. So here lies the new challenge for organizations. In order to successfully protect your data, you now need to do more than just regularly backing up your data and relying on capabilities like data anomaly detection as an indicator of compromise. But the problem is that data anomaly detection can't detect exfiltration since it's only designed to identify changes in the backed up data. In other words, there's no visibility or awareness of what's going on with the data on the primary source that might suggest that a malicious entity is indiscriminately amassing volumes of data. So here's the important takeaway. Detection of data exfiltration must occur much earlier post-infection, and the existing techniques that are built around data anomaly detection just aren't up to the task. Now, I want to be very clear here. Recovery still matters, especially since these ransomware 3.0 variants like LockBit are still going to encrypt the data in addition to exfiltrating, but it's this exfiltration piece that must be detected much earlier using different techniques. So, in other words, what ransomware 3.0 has actually done is it's subordinated the role of backup and recovery in the overall defense of the data. So, please don't get me wrong here. Backup and recovery are still crucially important, but they're insufficient alone. So, what does this mean for you as a data protection professional? Well, it means that your job just got a whole lot bigger. So, what are those additional capabilities that an organization now needs to defend against these ransomware 3.0 variants and the threat of data exfiltration? Well, the first thing that an organization needs is to be able to identify well in advance where its sensitive data is located, as well as what's in that data. So, think all the personal identifiers like social security numbers, credit card numbers, account numbers, and so forth, as well as who has access to the data. Now, these are classic data governance and data security problems, but at the same time, access to the data must be monitored and audited. Otherwise, how else is the organization going to be able to ensure that the data isn't leaking and only the right people and entities accessing the data are doing so based off of a legitimate business need? This is what's used to help establish compliance. So here's Cohesity's point of view. Data security and data governance must converge in order to tackle the data exfiltration threat posed by ransomware 3.0 head on. So, as these capabilities begin to converge and as it can be used by organizations to detect and to prevent data breach, there are a number of critical capabilities that must be brought to bear. And the first one is an ability to identify and discover where sensitive data resides across both the primary and secondary repositories. And this discovery of sensitive data must rely on accurate, content aware classification techniques. So it's not going to be sufficient just to rely on metadata or file extensions or other things that lack awareness of the content. The other keyword here is accurate. And this type of data classification must be deployable with minimal effort and support a wide range of sensitive data types. So think all the different forms of PII around the world. But it must support this out of the box with a minimal number of false positives. Now, the next thing that an organization needs is to drive remediation workflows, as well as to go and to streamline compliance reporting. So once classification of the data has been performed, an organization must analyze their findings against various regulatory and compliance frameworks. And then they need to identify the data owners and the custodians of the data who are responsible for this sensitive data so that they can drive remediation. Now, these workflows can vary. So it might be as simple as removing sensitive files from an open or overly permissive repository or tightening ACLs or applying encryption. But these remediation workflows can and should be automated. And this is really an area where organizations should be leveraging a modern IT service management or security orchestration and automated response platform. Now, the last piece of this is to take all of these insights into the content, location, exposure level of the sensitive data and combine it with continuous monitoring and AI-driven user and entity behavioral analytics to identify potential risks as the sensitive data is accessed. So for instance, using these techniques, it's going to be possible in near real time to detect when sensitive data is being accessed in an anomalous or potentially risky manner. And these techniques can even differentiate between normal access by regular users versus other access patterns that might be more indicative of insider threat or even a possible ransomware compromise where the data is being probed and staged in preparation for mass exfiltration. So as you heard earlier, Cohesity has announced its threat defense architecture to combat not just the ransomware 3.0 threat, but also to help our customers achieve specific outcomes as it relates to data protection and compliance, operational resiliency, and defense against sophisticated attacks. And at its core, threat defense is about providing Cohesity customers with a highly resilient platform that ensures the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data with capabilities like encryption and fault tolerance and immutability built into the platform. And this and this data resiliency is further augmented with comprehensive access control capabilities to ensure that entities accessing the data management platform conform with zero trust principles of no implicit trust, as well as authentication, authorization, and access control to the UI, CLI, and API based points of entry. And this is further strengthened with support for things like multi-factor authentication, granular and customizable role-based access control so that you can enforce the principle of least privilege, quorum approval so that you can prevent unitary overprivilege within administrative accounts. And this is a crucial capability to protect against threats like compromised accounts, as well as auditing and continuous monitoring capabilities to ensure compliance and operational integrity across the entire data management platform. But what's really unique to Cohesity in the threat defense architecture is that it incorporates other layers of protection. And this next layer is really about detection and analytics, a set of advanced capabilities ranging from data classification to near real-time threat detection to source-side data anomaly detection and adaptive behavioral analytics. And it's these detection and analytics capabilities that provide our customers with the knowledge of where their sensitive data resides in order to proactively address these compliance and governance issues that we talked about, things like data overexposure, answering questions like who's accessing the sensitive data, either legitimately or in a manner that may be more malicious intent, as well as the detection of threats like ransomware or malicious insiders in a near real-time manner before these threat actors have a chance to fully exfiltrate an organization's most sensitive assets. Now, the final layer of Cohesity threat defense is about ensuring our data management platform can be securely operationalized. And this has a number of implications. First, it means integrating and interoperating with the security infrastructure that our customers already have deployed. So think things from SIM to identity management, to vulnerability management, to threat detection. But this layer is also about ensuring that Cohesity remains an open and extensible data management platform. And this is where capabilities like our marketplace allow leading security ISVs, think companies like SentinelOne and Tenable, to build security apps that run close to the data, that help protect the data natively on the Cohesity platform. Importantly, the entire threat defense architecture is AI powered to help you automate security and detection so that you can protect against threats at scale. So let's recap about how you can leverage Cohesity data management to battle the scourge of ransomware. As we've discussed, the most effective protection against ransomware 1.0, the encryption of production data, is data protection and mass recovery at scale. And this plays into the advantages that Cohesity has always been built on: an immutable file system built on a fault-tolerant platform, continuous data protection, and instant mass restore. But these capabilities are further augmented with data anomaly detection to identify when data or a workload has been compromised or potentially compromised so it can be restored back to the latest clean snapshot. Now, in order to address the aggressiveness and viciousness of ransomware 2.0, new protections must be brought to bear. This includes data lock to ensure that nobody, not even an administrator, can delete backup sets, as well as an ability to protect data in things like an air-gapped data vault that may be implemented in an operationally independent manner from the data management platform. And Cohesity's forthcoming Project Fort Knox, which you have begun to hear about here at Connect, are really designed to make deploying an air-gapped data vault vastly simpler and more cost-effective for a wide range of customers who may lack the funding or expertise to architect a data vault on their own. Now, many of the strong zero trust oriented access controls that are built into the Cohesity platform, so things like multi-factor authentication and quorum approvals and role-based access control, help mitigate many of the aspects of the ransomware 2.0 threat. But finally, data exfiltration, which is the game changer of ransomware 3.0, this is what's tackled head on with Cohesity Data Govern. And so this offering is going to combine advanced AI and ML-based data classification and user and entity behavioral analytics to help our customers identify where their sensitive data resides, address issues like overexposure, drive remediation processes to clean up sensitive data, and leverage near real-time threat detection and adaptive behavioral analytics to identify entities that may be trying to amass data for exfiltration. So combined, Cohesity Data Protect, Data Govern, and Project Fort Knox will help our customers protect their data from even the most advanced ransomware threats. So in closing, allow me to quickly review some of the best practices to defend your data against ransomware and potential breaches. And this really includes, first and foremost, protecting your backups. Now, you are all very diligent in making sure that you are backing up your workloads, making sure that you've got effective SLAs. But some of the other things that you should be doing here is you should be using capabilities like data lock to ensure that no entity, not even an administrator, can actually delete the backup sets. You're also no doubt aware of the classic 3-2-1 rule of backup, but don't forget the last piece, the one, and make sure that you are maintaining at least one copy of your data in an operationally isolated data vault. Now, you also want to focus on securing your environment. And I think if there's one takeaway that I want everybody to go home with, it's turn on multi-factor authentication. This is one of the most effective controls that you can implement to protect against account compromise. But some of the other things that you want to be doing here are ensuring that you're using different credentials for all of your privileged accounts across systems, ensuring that you're leveraging the role-based access control capabilities so that different users of the system are granted the least set of privileges based off of their job duties. And then this is a basic hygiene issue, but make sure that you keep your data management platform as well as your workloads up to date. So, stay up to date on patches and software updates. The next thing that you want to focus on is building an awareness around your data crown jewels. And so this is about proactively identifying where your sensitive data is and identifying areas of overexposure in advance. It's also about monitoring to identify these unusual behaviors that might be early indicators that some sort of malicious entity may be trying to exfiltrate data from your organization. And finally, work on preparing your whole organization. Most organizations tend to be pretty diligent about performing backup, but far fewer are actually diligent in actually practicing recovery and ensuring in advance that they have an ability to recover their data. You also want to work with your colleagues on the InfoSec side of the house to make data management part of that overall layered defense so that it complements what you're doing across other endpoints and other points of entry into your organization. And then finally, you should be driving security awareness and training for all personnel inside of your organization. So on behalf of Raj and everybody here at Cohesity, we hope that you found this a useful and insightful presentation. And please stay safe out there. Thank you.